So, back in the day, jingle, 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 back in the day, before the death grips were a thing, okay? Jingle, jingle, pay attention now. I said your favorite word, the death grips, okay? The death grips, dingle, dangle, dingle, dangle. Okay, before that was a thing, the concept of hip hop with heavy and experimental, dingle, 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 jingle, jingle, it's okay, look at the shiny. Back in the old yonder years of so long ago, literally ancient history, 1991. We're talking about 1991, so far ago, okay? Pay attention. This was the originator, the ancient ancestor. You dig up the bones, you go down deep in the sedimentary layers of industrial on the internet, you'll get this. Don't forget, ignore everything below it, that don't matter.
Oh, I hit my... There we go.
Okay, I'm kidding, obviously, dialected a lot, but I did notice another duo following the same path named Techno Animal. They were very interesting to me because after dropping one of their best albums, Brotherhood of the Bomb, they didn't make anything since, and this was a really good album. I mentioned it before, but Dialect was in their last track, and surprisingly LP is also there too for We Can Build You, as in like Company Flow to Run the Jewels LP. He was in this. I don't think most LP fans even know that, and after listening to his music, I wouldn't even be surprised if he was somewhat inspired by Techno Animal. They made some stuff in the 90s that wasn't entirely hip hop, but the last one was, and was made all the way back in 9/11. I'm not even kidding. Past that there's nothing there, so what happened to them? Well, to figure that out, we first need to know who the two guys are that make the music. Kevin Martin, aka The Bug, and Justin Broadwick, aka Justin Broadwick. Now, these two have made a bunch of music before and after this, which makes more sense since it's hard for me to believe that they only made this. To keep it brief, Techno Animal was simply just a side project that Kevin and Justin worked on, among many other ones like Ice and God. Yes, those are the names. God was actually Kevin's band, which started as a jazzcore metal group, and I say jazzcore because I'm not even kidding, the lineup was Kevin on vocals and saxophone, and some other guy was on guitar. I found the source and it says it was Shane Rogan, but Wikipedia says it's Nigel Armstrong. I have no idea where they got that from. Who the fuck is Nigel Armstrong? Kevin started the band because Mark Edward Smith wanted a song from him to put on his compilation album. That's another famous guy, you don't need to know him. Justin, however, grew up with a pretty shitty home life. They both did, actually. I don't use Wikipedia for my sources, obviously, but when I was casually researching for this, I saw that Justin's parents, his stepdad and mom, were members of Antisocial, a band infamous for live shows involving blood and fecal matter, as well as for soliciting people to commit suicide via guillotine live on stage. This is back in the 1970s, by the way, so sources are hard to find, but what the fuck? Live guillotine? What? Guillotine? I found an article talking about it, I'll link it in the description, but there's papers there that just read, Antisocial, the world's most violent rock group, offer up to £15,000 to any person willing to commit suicide in public, method beheadal by automatic guillotine. Back to Justin Broadwick though, his parents obviously influenced him with that kind of music like Alice Cooper, the Sex Pistols, Lou Reed, and his album Metal Machine Music. He joined bands at an early age, most notably Napalm Death in 1985 at just 15, and worked heavily on Scum. 95% of the A-side of Scum was my music, he says. I was sitting in my bedroom in a council estate in Birmingham, writing riff after riff after riff. I was a weird machine. After that, he would work for other music groups for a bit before moving on to the band that he was the most prominent in, Godflesh, formed by fellow Fall of Because member Benny Green and Justin. This is probably like his magnum opus. Like, he'd be in other things obviously because he loves making music, but Godflesh was the one he'd be most known for in his career. Look, like Justin Broadwick to Godflesh is like Zach Hill to Death Grips, okay?
Oh, tingle, tingle.
But no, seriously, this was his main thing. Godflesh would go on to perform with other bands and live shows, and this would eventually include Kevin Martin's band, God. The two met and quickly became friends, and since Kevin Martin didn't really have an official guitarist for the band, Justin would decide to join for a bit to work on their first EP in 1990, called Breach Birth. He would become an official member and help work on the rest of God's albums all the way till 1997, where they would basically disband from there. They weren't too well known, but they would get appreciated from other artists like J.G. Thirlwell, John Zorn, Bill Laswell, and My Bloody Valentine. God would disband at around 1997, but other projects were formed from these two for the love of industrial music. those projects later becoming Techno Animal and Ice. I'll get into Techno Animal in a bit, but I'll mention Ice too because it's a pretty short project of theirs. Ice would have Kevin and Justin mess around with sampling for a bit, using it in the background of their own instruments. You know how like rappers would rap over an instrumental which comes from a sample? Well, Ice is the same thing, but instead of rapping, they play their own instruments over it, as well as sing.
I saw her in a big mama shit about what she got. Name
It exists to see if sampling and musicians could be integrated for the best of both worlds, says Kevin Martin. They made 2 albums and disbanded in 1998, but on their last album, on track 3, named Trapped in 3 Dimensions, you hear this.
You could catch a flash of an image of a master with a linear phallus. Blew a path through 60-second deceptions that promised me the palace.
For those of you who don't know, that's LP. Again, LP is on Bad Blood rapping. I'm pretty sure that's like only a handful of people even know about this. There's some other rappers who aren't too well known on here, like Priest, Sensational, and Toasty Taylor. I'm not sure if that makes this an industrial hip hop album, but it's pretty close, especially for 1998. They did have an album before this named Under the Skin in 1993, but that was mostly just instrumentals. There's not really much rapping or singing. Techno Animal formed from the two pretty quickly at around when they met, and they would go on to release an album in 1991 called Ghosts. It's a pretty weird album with mostly ambient tracks. The highlights for me are Burn, shout out to this comment, White Dog, Freak Fucker, The Dream Forger, which I'm pretty sure is just Martin going off on the saxophone, and God vs. Flesh. I wonder what that's a reference to. The songs are pretty long, but they honestly would make great background tracks for a horror game, so I guess I can keep that in mind. After that, they would go on to release another ambient project in 1995 called Re-Entry, and after listening to this, I actually kind of enjoy the really long tracks. The main difference between this album and the first is that Ghost felt very empty, I guess, kind of like a ghost. While Re-Entry, like the name suggests, felt as if Kevin and Justin finally nailed down the right sound they were looking for and made that into an album. It breaks away from the ambient horror-like soundscapes into something much more dystopian and sci-fi. A couple of more years later, they would go on to release a collab album with Porter Ricks called Symbiotic in 1999. Porter Ricks being another duo composed of Thomas Koner and Andy Melwick. The name most likely came from Porter Ricks' 1996 album Biokinetics. The big difference between this album and their other work is that instead of having just ambient music, Techno Animal would focus on remixing the tracks, adding some hip-hop influenced bass lines and beats. They wouldn't completely make the jump to hip-hop yet, but they seem to have the instrumentals down for it. The songs are pretty good, and you can tell which one was worked on more by Techno Animal or Porter Ricks since, well, they literally had their names on it. There isn't much, but the songs are very long, the longest sounding like a dance track. From there though, it would only take about 2 years for the next and final album, which was released on that date, Brotherhood of the Bomb. From the start, they'd experiment with the heavy usage of samples for their songs, not really finding the proper layering to it until a couple of years later. From there, once they were good enough, they added a bit more to the beat with some hip hop elements. This made it pretty close to industrial rap, but there was one thing they were forgetting.
Preparation sees fleeced enormous digital signal sparring starting off in better shapes. It never makes a difference to the
Mine's minuscule pint size measurement marbles smears a searing structure shredding the shattered
basic born a fast to combat a suffer Aladdin. Perhaps that very basic companion to damage tantrum.
Brotherhood of the Bomb was their fourth and last album of Techno Animal, the duo ending on a very high note with this being their most famous release. It's also just all around a really good album. Kevin and Justin create these really brutal industrial instrumentals which already sound great on their own, but with the addition of another MC on top of it makes this far better than the rest of their discography. Although there are quite a few instrumentals on this album. This usually pops out whenever a song doesn't have a feature on a track. They're pretty good, but there is a lot and the songs are pretty long. If you look back at their older stuff though, it could have been way worse, so I can't really complain. The album starts off in the highest note with Cruiser Mode 101, this song being way ahead of its time and sounding the most Death Grips like.
Jingle, jangle, jingle, jangle.
No, seriously, this sounds really close to giving bad people good ideas. There's even a loud yelling section that sounds pretty similar. The tracks midway through the album are pretty good, but honestly, it's really hard to beat the first song. It's where most of the instrumentals are, and the album ends with the last few tracks being We Can Build You with LP and Vast, Blood Money, and Hell with Dialect, an experimental hip-hop group that I've made a video on before. Toasty Taylor makes another appearance, as well as some other rappers like Rubber Room, Anti-Pop Consortium, and Sonic Sum. The songs are all great and wrap this up to be a pretty solid album. If I was a fan of them back then, I would have been pretty excited to see what else they come up with. But obviously, as we know now, Techno Animal just disbanded from there, so what happened? Well, if you recall how Broadwick and Martin ended Ice and God, it kind of makes sense why they just left. Look, Justin Broadwick was still with Godflesh during this entire time, while Kevin Martin went under a new name called The Bug to produce his own personal albums. Techno Animal wasn't made with the intent of being this long-lasting duo. It was all just fun side projects to them that they somewhat took seriously. It sucks because obviously I'm making a video about them, so they must have been important, and they were. Their discography was great in setting the foundations of industrial hip-hop. And yeah, I know, they weren't technically the first because there's always some guy before it, some obscure looking album. I know the Beatniks, alright, but this is different because this is really good. And I mean good as in it still contends with being a great album, even by today's standards. And I want people to know it because I think I just found a fucking gem of an album. I gotta tell someone about this. I should probably explain why there's hip-hop influence on this album because, I mean, Broadwick and Martin aren't in rap groups, so like, what happened? Well, the influence of hip-hop mainly came from Public Enemy at the time, but as we know from Ice, Techno Animal wasn't the only thing Broadwick and Martin put that influence on. They also mentioned dubbing, or dub, as another influence point. I didn't even know that dub was a thing in music. I just thought it was, you know, the thing in shows where you put it on when you don't want to read subtitles. But apparently dub is a musical style that came between the 1960s and 70s as a way to remix original songs by adding more emphasis to the rhythm section with effects. So basically having really heavy drums and bass. You can tell where they put that influence in Techno Animal with songs like Hypertension. The duo use it a lot since it adds to that industrial atmosphere, but you're only going to get it really from this album and maybe a few other songs because, you know, they're done. That's it. That's the end of Techno Animal. But that wouldn't be the end of Broadwick and Martin. "16 years would pass between Martin and Broadwick. They wouldn't be separated or anything, they just wouldn't really be a duo from there, as one would go on to continue on his own while the other performed mainly in Godflesh and Jesus sometime later. The Bug would go on to work with various other artists, usually having multiple features on albums, like for example Angels and Devils, where he had Death Grips themselves for a song, which I think is like the only collab Death Grips has with anyone, except for Bjork I guess. He even formed his own trio named King Midas Sound with a Jamaican poet and a Japanese singer. This has got to be the most diverse group I've ever seen. That was like in 2009, but alas, it wasn't enough for Martin. They were never the same. They couldn't compare to Broadwick, and he realized that in 2017, when Martin finally reached out to him so they could get back together again.
I don't want a trio. I don't want a trio. I want my duo. I want my duo. I want my duo.
I saw it glitter as I...
Okay, that might have been like a little exaggerated, but fanfiction aside, they would meet, but go off of a new name instead. Although a lot of people don't know this. I mean I didn't even know it, but they apparently did. In their last official Techno Animal show, Martin actually had to perform it solo because Justin was too phobic to get on a plane. I feel like this article makes it seem like Justin wussed out, but he was actually like going through some really bad stuff during this time. I couldn't find any articles on this, but apparently on Wikipedia it says that he broke up with his girlfriend of 13 years and slipped down a mental spiral for a while and had to crash at a friend's place to recover. It would put Godflesh at a pause and would also unofficially end Techno Animal in 2001 as he recovered. Until, well, 16 years later, kinda. You know that one high quality clip I show of them together? Well, that's actually when they got back together in 2017, but instead of Techno Animal, they would be now called Zonal. I think that's how you pronounce it, I don't know. Kevin did mention in an interview in 2012 that they both actually hated the name Techno Animal. We were really bored of that name by then, and techno suddenly became this huge genre obviously, and that had nothing to do with us. So we told them we wanted to change the name, and they basically said if we wanted to change the name, they won't sign us, they being the record label. Kevin also mentions why God and Techno Animal, as well as Ice too, just stopped dead in their tracks once it got popular, and his answer is honestly pretty respectable. For me, I have no problem stopping a project if I think it's dead. If I feel like there's no idea or being used up, like with God and Techno Animal, we stop them dead. We felt they reached where we wanted them to go. We can't think of a new direction that would make sense. So yeah, Zonal is technically its own thing, but it pretty much picked up where Techno Animal left off. Although they haven't really released much albums except for the Quatermass project and Wrecked in 2019. Apparently the Quatermass project was in the 2000s, so it was originally going to be part of the Techno Animal name, but you know what happened before, so I'm guessing they just shelved it until they started the new name later. They haven't released an album since 2025, and well, this is where Techno Animal or Zonal currently stands today. An interesting duo that would create some of the best industrial hip-hop albums with some surprising and not so surprising collaborations happening too. I've really enjoyed listening to their music. It just sucks they had to go on for so long without working together again. Doing the research for this video though has opened me up to some pretty cool artists, so I can't say that it was all too bad. But anyways, that's gonna be it for today. Thank you to anyone that's still watching. I hope you can get something out of this. You can join my membership if you want to support me and get extended versions of my videos. Like for this one, I went a little bit deeper into the antisocial band. That was really something. You can get cool stickers too, but I just really appreciate it. This was more of a lighter video for me since I've just started uni. I apologize if it's been a while and I didn't just come back with something big, but don't worry, I've got ideas, I'll get through them. I'm just taking a moment to adjust, but it won't be too long until I've got something pretty cool. Thank you again if you're still staying for this, but that'll be it for me. Peace. You can join my membership if you want to support me and get extended versions of my videos. Like for this one, I went a little bit deeper into the antisocial band. That was really something. You can get cool stickers too, but I just really appreciate it.